Suicidal rates are on the rise. 80% of suicides are completed by men. Men's loneliness is on the rise. Yeah, I've seen a spike from 1990 to 2021, and it's going to be projected to get even worse. This is why I started normalizing men's mental health. Please tune in to the rest of the episode. Hey, what's going on, Mike? How you doing today, bud?
I am doing absolutely great today. How are you?
Doing good. I don't know why I just started off like that, but I just all of a sudden jumped the gun. I was having a great conversation with you before. Well, guys, this is Mike Bryck. Men and ladies, this is Mike Bryck. I just had a pleasure conversation talking to him. He's an interesting guy. He sent me a message on Facebook about how roller coasters saved his life, and I was like, please tell me more. So, Mike, tell me more and tell me about who you are.
So yes, my name is Mike Brick. I am now a. I like to call myself a content creator. I don't like the term influencer. In the theme park space in Orlando, and in the past, I was doing a couple different jobs. I'm sure we'll get into them, but a couple different really emotionally taxing jobs. And during the pandemic, um, I got COVID and then long COVID, which really played on my mental illness, which was I'd already been diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and I got to a place where I just didn't want to be alive anymore. Disney and theme parks here had become a really important place for my wife and I, and we came down and quite literally, I thought I came down here for my last trip alive, my last trip with the love of my life, and was sitting here on uh, Sunset Boulevard in Disney's Hollywood Studios. And I looked at her and I thought to myself, you know what? When I'm in a theme park, I want to be alive. And if I can want to be alive in a theme park, there must be a way for me to translate that to when I'm not in a theme park. Um, but what I want to do is just start with the theme park and start with where I want to be alive. So that's what I did. And also got myself back in counseling, got my medication adjusted, but I really made that decision, and I can. It's on my Instagram. There's actually a reel of the actual bench that I was sitting on, me sitting on that bench, and there's something really cool about being able to go to an actual place and go, this right here, this is where I decided to take the first step and want to be alive. Um, and every single day I try and spread two things: my love of theme parks and just my message of you matter. Folks talk so often, especially when we're going through things, and they say it gets better. And I hate that because you don't know that it does not get better. We also so often talk about in mental health about living for your family, living for your kids, living for your pets, your job, whatever, and that's great and that's fine. But if you don't start inside, you can't ever go outside. So what I say is you matter, because that takes into account where you are right now. I don't, if all you did today was wake up and not end your life, that's great. You matter where you are right now. And, it's a term. I remember my, one of my first career goals, I had a number of them. I have ADHD as well, so that probably explains that I go off on massive tangents. One of my first goals in life was to be a police officer. So I was working downtown Toronto as a security officer at a hospital, and we often dealt with the police. And I asked this old sergeant, what's your best advice for a guy who just wants to go into this world? and he said, "Meet people where they are." And, you know, my motto of "You matter" is my updated version of meeting people where they are, because if I can be the one person that says that to someone today, that says they matter just as they are, and that helps them, that's what I want to do.
Well, Mike, I want to say first off, glad that you're alive. Second
Thank you.
off, I wasn't sure which order I was going to say this, but you have a great shirt, man. Love Roosevelt's, like we were just sharing about. But no, in all seriousness, your story really does hit home with me. I've shared this many of times, but like I had 2 suicide attempts in my life. The first was I had an AR-15. I had the barrel underneath my chin. It wasn't my person I was with at the time. It was my ex-wife, and the thing that stopped me was my dog licking the blood off my head, and I'm like, "If the dog is actually licking the blood off my head and that's actually making me cry, that means I still have a reason to exist."
Yeah.
The second time is when I just wanted to let go of everything, and I checked myself into a psych ward, 7 days. I remember saying, "If this doesn't work, I got a $15,000 credit card. I'm not gonna pay it back, I'll just end my life." And kind of very similar to the theme park for what you were saying. And then I went to a residential. That's definitely not a really great example, a psych ward compared to a theme park, but tomatoes, tomatoes. And
Uh, there are some days.
but and then I did a 13-week residential. And when I was there, I remember I was saying, if this doesn't work, I'm gonna end my life. And it just it hits home when you say like, hey, I went to this place and I realized I wanted to live.
Yeah.
I wanted to breathe. I wanted to be. And it hit home. The second part of what you were saying, you matter. I was thinking about the inverse of just accepting people where they're in time, being emotionally ready and available, regardless of what state somebody's in, so you could be able to be that sounding board or being able to lower your vibration enough so when they're up there, you're able to help them bring them back down so that they don't have to feel that way. So taking care of yourself first is an easier way to be able to say other people matter. It's because you're able to show up for them.
Yeah. No, and, well, first off, I'm really glad you're still alive. Um, and, one of the things in going down this journey of creating content in theme parks is it has led me to meet a lot of veterans and a lot of active duty military people, um, because they gravitate towards, Disney mostly, but also some of the other theme parks. And I'm always struck by when I tell my story to a veteran, they immediately get it. They immediately understand, and the number of times I've had a veteran just look at me and say exactly what you just said, "I'm glad you're still alive." Um, I would never compare what I've gone through to what someone who's gone to war has gone through, but at the end of the day, everyone has a journey, everyone has hard, there's a wonderful person named Ash Beckham who, she did a couple of TED Talks, and then has done speaking, since then. I had the pleasure of booking her for an event that I was organizing, and one of her biggest TED Talks is where she's talking about, we have to stop measuring our bad and comparing it to someone else's bad, and just commiserate on the fact that we all have bad. And, you know, she's LGBTQ, and she says, you know, my closet has rainbow walls, but your closet might be telling your dad that you just lost your job, might be telling your wife that you just gambled away all of the savings for the house. Um, and there's no point in comparing what those all look like, because that's a hard conversation. And I think that you were talking about lowering your vibration, and I see that as being ready to have that hard conversation with someone. And I did that. I worked the majority of my adult life. I worked in homelessness prevention and in income security. I didn't mention this. I'm Canadian, and my wife and I are in the process of moving down here to Florida to be near theme parks. But majority of my adult career was in Canada, and I worked for the municipal government, but through provincially funded programs. And it always struck me that I'm sitting there having the hardest conversation this person may ever have. Um, and my goal in that time was always to find some way to make them laugh. Um, as stupid as I had to be, as silly as I had to be, as just corny, the worst dad joke I could think of. My goal was I'm gonna make this person laugh at some point. And every single time that I got that person to laugh, that was when the conversation really opened up. Um, and I think back to that part of my career, and I wish I had understood what you just said, that, the important part is to take care of yourself first, because I did not understand that then. I spent a lot of time trying to just save the world, take on all of the hardest cases, all of the hardest clients, um, fix all of the problems in the world, which led me to the second part of my career, which was I was a union rep, for my coworkers, and then I ended up going professionally doing it for healthcare workers. Um, and I just, I ended up basically, I had burnt out from social work. Um, and I had to figure out something new to do. So rather than figure out what was wrong with me and why I felt I had to fight the rest of the world, I was like, well, I'm just going to go find a bigger fight.
Hmm.
Um, and luckily or unluckily, there was a global pandemic going on at the time. So there was a massive, massive fight in healthcare workers. So I went there, and I managed 2 years. To 2 years before I completely and totally melted down and had, you know, I've been suicidal probably 3 times in my life. But that time was when it came the closest. It was the worst because it was not only the compounding effect of never dealing with the issues I was dealing with properly. I'd figure out ways to get past the issue and then just go back to the fight because 'cause people were counting on me. People were counting on me to fix their problems, and my problems weren't important enough to stop and take account of because I needed to get back and I needed to fix their problems. Um, so it was a combination of that, and like I mentioned, long COVID had completely and totally destroyed my mental health. Um, and some other factors that I can't really talk about because of non-disclosure agreements with my former employer. But let's just say I didn't have the most supportive work environment at the time. Um, and I just completely, completely broke down. And I think that's when I got to the point that I finally had to have that discussion with myself and say, well, if the first thing you have to do to feel okay is go to a theme park and just be at a theme park for you, do that. And I think it's obviously not, a theme park's not going to be everyone's answer. A residential treatment center might be someone's answer. Art might be someone's answer. Music
Hmm.
might be someone's answer. But I, I think my aunt went, she was an alcoholic, um, well, is an alcoholic. And she went through a 12-step program. And I've done training in addictions counseling. And I always had this problem with 12-step program in that it requires you to believe in a higher power. Um, and I didn't understand that until I got to the point where I understood that the higher power can really be anything you don't have any control over. It doesn't have to be a god, it doesn't have to be a religion, it could just be anything that you don't have power over. Um, so at the end of the day, the two things, theme parks and my belief that eventually the Toronto Maple Leafs will win the Stanley Cup turned into the two higher powers that I believed in. And I laugh about that, but at the same time, I don't care whether someone's reason is silly because it's their reason. And that's, I talk about theme parks saving my life because I want people to open up the possibility that their reason could be just as silly as a theme park, just as silly as Mickey Mouse. Um, and that's fine because all you've got to do is find that way to keep going until you can figure out the rest of the steps. Because there always are there are more steps. There's a terrible joke in the theme park community that I don't like, where they're like, yeah, Disney is my therapy because real therapy costs $150 an hour and Disney costs less.
Hmm.
And I get it. It's funny. But at the same time, I'm like, that that is posing Disney as an alternative to therapy. And it's not. Disney is something that you can hang on to while you figure out the therapy. Um, but that's a harder conversation to have than the short, oh, I go to theme parks because it's cheaper than therapy. But I think that it's really, really important for us to remember that getting better and healing is so multifaceted. But the first thing is finding that thing that you survive for. And yeah. It's funny. I have two very different responses to people when they'll ask me, well, tell me about theme park saving your life. And, some of them are like, yeah, I get that. And others just don't get it. They say, well, no, that wasn't what saved me your life. And I'm like, well, maybe it wasn't the only thing that saved my life, but in that moment, I was looking for something somewhere that I felt okay. And that was a theme park. And it's interesting to me that some people get a very negative reaction to that, and they don't like to hear that. And I sometimes wonder if that's them not wanting to see what they need. And it's a tendency I think men have, um, to ignore the nice in our life, to ignore just wanting to feel okay. I had the pleasure of interviewing two guys who were starting up a new podcast. Um, it's called the Disney Dadcast, and they're both veterans. And we were talking about why Disney, why did that become something that was so important to you? And like I said, I never compare myself to a veteran, but the answer was it was the one place that all three of us felt okay.
Hmm.
And I think that's, it's so important that, and the fact that theme parks open up connection to other people. You can go to a Disney theme park and complete strangers will wave at you as you're going by on the parking tram. And wouldn't it be cool if the rest of the world was like that? If you could just complete strangers are driving by in the bus, you're like, "Hey, what's going on?" Um, because we've forgotten how to make that connection.
There's a lot of things that you were just saying where the Disney was a distraction that you needed at that time, and it was a disruptor piece where it allows you
Yep,
to have the more emotional bandwidth instead of running on E or, like, all the way up
yep,
high to be able to go to deep dive. When you were saying that, "Hey, this is cheaper to go here than it is to go to therapy," to me, that becomes a behavioral addiction when I think
yeah,
about it. When you were talking about how you were, like, disrupted and long COVID messed up your mental health. Long COVID sucked. Like, people don't talk about when you're in pain, you can't smell, you can't taste, you can't do this, you can't do that. It fucks with your psyche because it's totally dysregulating it, very similar to what I was saying about lowering your energy.
yeah,
When you were actually alluding to about, like, not the comparative suffering, when you were doing that or saying which one's worse, which one's better,
yeah,
what you're doing is you're not listening to the person. You're doing a dick measuring contest, and I hate to use
yeah,
that type of verbiage. And when you were talking about, like, healing or going to therapy, Carl Jung, Jordan Peterson borrows this phrase from Carl Jung and paraphrases it. It's being the best version of yourself is the best way to show somebody you love them. Because when you are actually the best version of yourself, you can show up for them in a much deeper connection. When people say when you start healing, they think it's selfish. It's one of the most selfless things you can do. And yeah, when you said that Disney or theme park saved your life, I was like, tell me more. And to be honest with you, it's because it's just when they talk about in DBT, they talk about being a disruptor and
yeah,
to disrupt the thought, to be able to give it a little bit more understanding instead of actually allowing the emotion to control you. You're allowing yourself to be able to observe it a little bit more. And when you talked about the like people waving to you, so this is a controversial topic, but MDMA was actually meant to be a couples therapy drug. When couples are tending to be at the breaking point to end a relationship, they stop talking to each other and they start actually reacting and becoming controversial. And it's a way to be able to break down those invisible walls. And so that's why you're talking about this. You're having a bunch of dopamine hits, and it's all that
yeah,
love right there. Dude, what you're saying to me is all beautiful. It makes perfect sense to me. And I think it makes perfect
yeah.
sense to anybody else that's listening. And I'm glad that you found theme parks. So curious, when you start opening up to your wife about this is where I was, this is the moment in time that I had flipped the switch back on and say, hey, I'm ready to live. How was that conversation for you?
You know, I think we realized that we were both in a very similar place for different reasons. We both had long COVID. And you know, she had her own struggle, where she ended up before me being out of a job. And we realized how, and I think you're right, that we had stopped communicating. And you know, realizing that I we both needed to be better for each other and better for ourselves. And it's been the hardest, but the most satisfying part of both of our lives. Figuring out how we get back to where we are, back to being open and communicating and talking, and but she also, I mean, she was there. She jumped in hook, line, and sinker, and you know, I said, I think we should move to Florida, and she was like, yeah, we should. We really should. And that, I she's another reason I'm alive. I think that's really important to say, is that she and her acceptance of where I am and what I was going through is absolutely another reason that I lived through what I went through.
It's nice to have somebody to just be there with you and actually like suffering a little bit. The and just some people might not understand this, but having that deep, vulnerable conversation when both of you guys are struggling and both of you guys felt very alone in a relationship, and then having the wherewithal to be able to come back together is beautiful, man. It actually
Yeah.
really enhances the relationship and like no other.
Yeah, it's the best thing that ever happened to us. It really is. Um, because like I said, I mean, I went from my career in social work where I was putting my needs second to my clients to my career in union work where I was putting my needs second to members. And that was constantly draining my batteries and just constantly I love spoon theory. I was constantly out of spoons. And I'm sure if I say spoon theory, I think you understand it. Some folks might not understand spoon theory, but it's the idea that we all start with the same amount of spoons, but then if someone's got chronic illness or mental illness, it takes more spoons to get through normal things in their day. Um, and if you don't take the time to to do the dishes and recharge your spoon count, um, you're there's only a set amount of spoons that you can have, and once you're out, you're out.
So when you're talking about this perspective, and I'm going to definitely go on this analogy with you, but then I'm curious about your childhood. But it's this is when I think about with alcohol or with addictions or anything. We're like we'll actually need more and more spoons to be able to feed it. We'll even try to use somebody else's spoons, but we really can't take it, and we
Yeah,
actually start draining them. But we have to look insidewards to see why are we dirtying up so much? Why are we abusing this? What is creating this narrative in our brain to make everything dirty?
yeah,
Like when I think about like I said, there's addiction and then there's distraction. And cool, you had a disruptor and that's great. And that's what you needed. And at that time you're able to replenish that fucking bathwater for you. You add, yeah, more soap, maybe even possibly able to put in a washing machine, not washing machine, a dishwasher,
yeah,
and clean it up. Because, like you talked about being in pain and then actually mental health, like you can't give any more to somebody else, and then they feel like they're drowning. Then they feel like it's secondary because the other person's not able to help them. And if we're not taking care of our pain, we're not taking care of the insides. How are we supposed to feel like, Who cares about my spoons? Who cares about them being dirty? I do, but
yeah.
not really." And all of a sudden you're out. So I can get what you're saying. But I'm curious about your childhood because a lot of times I feel like that's where all of our building blocks are. Then how was your childhood? How was it like you being raised? Were you raised with like education being something, music, sports?
Uh, I mean, I had a fantastic childhood. I grew up extremely privileged. Um, I did have I do have learning disabilities, so I was able to get diagnosed with AD. Well, it was I always joke I'm so old that my ADHD came in standard definition. It was just ADD when I got diagnosed, but I was able to get diagnosed relatively early. Um, I think the hardest part of my childhood was, and hardest part of my life has been friends. Co peers, School was always tough. I was, you know, bullied pretty extensively. I've always been kind of the bigger kid, clumsy, and with the learning disabilities, you tend to be more of a victim for bullies. So that was what started a lot of my long-term struggles was, experiencing bullying, experiencing, um, challenges and not, it's a tough thing that, and we were talking about it earlier, that we live in a society that weirdly encourages violence and anger, but punishes those who are violent and angry. Um, and I would always, when I was young and kids were bullying me, they'd find ways to bully me that weren't violent. Um, and I would put up with it for a certain while, and then I'd get fed up, and then and when I say I'd react violently, I didn't, take out a knife or anything. I'd shove them into a locker or something like that because I was much bigger than most of the kids in my grade. But I'd lash out physically. So then I'd end up in trouble.
Hmm.
And that was try trying to understand that perspective of people will come along and try and challenge you in ways that will make your reaction the problem.
Hmm.
That was one of the hardest things that I ever dealt with, and I think that's something that, to this day I still deal with in certain ways, and I think a lot of people deal with it where, um, it's really easy to say, "Well, yeah, Mike got so mad." And it's like, "Well, okay, but can we talk about why Mike got mad? Because there was probably a reason why Mike got mad." Um, and I think that to this day there's this, it's so easy to fall into that trap with people
Hmm.
because especially if you care. I mean, if you don't care, it's really easy to avoid these things because you just don't care. But if you're someone that, like me, I've deeply cared my entire life. It's so easy to get trapped in that sort of that trap of caring what others think, caring what others say, caring what others do, and leaving yourself open to um, that behavioral trap. If that makes sense.
It does. What I'm actually hearing is, like I said before, it's like the large coup. Like with a baby, when a baby is actually in an infantile stage, will make a coo noise to be able to get attention or get the reaction. And unfortunately, when people are bullying, you say, "Hey, dude, cut it out," and then they're like, "Oh, well, I'm gonna keep going. Well, maybe I'm gonna try to annoy him." And then all of a sudden, no, they just keep amping it up because they want that reaction out of you, and then they
Yeah,
want to amp it up even more, and then you're like, I told you enough. Like, and then on top of it, how many people get penalized for protecting people now?
yeah,
Because a lot of times so now you're defenseless, you're alone, and you have people, you're like, well, I'm going to take it up. I'm going to escalate this because, well, my verbal judo is not doing it, or I don't know that skill yet. And the teachers are not seeing you, their parents are not seeing you, classmates are not seeing you. So, you know what? I'm gonna make this be seen. I'm gonna push this kid into the locker.
Yeah.
Screw this kid. And it makes a lot of sense to me because think about when people are struggling, like if they're struggling mental health wise, they'll go to alcohol or other substances and just to hide away, or actually be able to show people there's a problem, then they'll just start disappearing. And then if a kid actually has a problem, they start withdrawing, or they might have a food addiction or a
Yep.
self-soothing through the because America, we have a I think I don't know how bad Canada is, but our food has a high caloric intake, and they make the food so tasty that it makes it so that we want to eat. Like yesterday, I binged on a pie of pizza. I was like, "This
Yep.
thing tastes so damn good." But anyways, what I'm getting at is that I totally understand where you're coming from because
Yes.
kids are douchebags, and on
Yep.
top of it, they're probably doing this to get the laughs from other people because they're not getting seen by their parents, and it's just like this cycle of let's actually pick on people, and then you're pretty much getting the shit downhill. So I apologize about your childhood, and most people don't realize that's part of like a fucked up parenting and not being able to
Yeah.
take care of your kids.
Adults suck too.
Yeah.
There's I forget the name. I forget who sings a song, but there's a song called "High School Never Ends," and it's it's so accurate, and especially if you're someone in your early 40s like me, it talks a lot about growing up in the 90s and being in high school and thinking, oh yeah, when I get out of high school, people aren't going to care what I wear anymore, and they're not going to care if I'm cool or whatever. And then you get out into the real world and you're like, oh, people still care about all this crap. Um, and it's funny, Roosevelt's actually, they had a big part in my learning to just accept myself and be who I am. Um, just be the exact nerd that I am. If I want to walk around Target in a Deadpool with a chimichanga Roosevelt, I'm just going to do it because that's who I am. And it, I don't know if you're in many of the Facebook groups for Roosevelts, but there's a massive, and there's women that wear Roosevelts too. Um, but there's a lot of men who I think really began to open up emotionally and open up and find community through Roosevelt's. Um, and that's cool. That's it's another thing. It's someone's theme park was probably these silly shirts.
S-
Um,
I'll tell you about my addiction with Roosevelt. I have over 30 something shirts, close to damn near 40.
yep,
And it all started from a Goodwill find, wearing these pink flamingos because I was getting ready to go play in an adult kickball league. And I decided to go test the VA's boundaries of graphic shirts. And so living in Montana, we have a lot less rules and regulations compared to the other states. And, or at the same time, I'm like, I wear these shirts to work as a peer specialist.
yep,
And I was so used to going into a place that was so muted,
yep,
and, like, how many people actually were, like, wearing gray or black or white, and then all of a sudden you feel like it's very sterile,
yep,
and I'm 6'2", 260. I am, like, kind of like a Sasquatch of a man, and
yep,
I wear this stuff to throw people off kilter, but the real reason I started wearing these fun shirts is and I'm very honest with people, I felt seen by people. They're like, "Oh, cool shirt.
yep,
Great shirt." And then all of a sudden I started wearing it because I wanted that dopamine hit. I
yeah,
wanted to be seen. I wanted to be valued. And it was so easy because you know how many other people just want to be seen and heard? But anyways, I digress. So that's why my
Yeah,
addiction with Roosevelt started.
and you're right. I mean, it's so cool. I mean, I whether I'm, back home in Canada walking through a mall or walking through a Disney theme park or just walking through Target here in Florida, I get stopped all the time. And people are like, "Oh my god, I love your shirt." Um, and I think back and, I make the connection that when I was growing up, uh, I was acting out to get that kind of a reaction out of people.
Mhm.
And now I can just wear this silly shirt and people are like, "Hey, I love that shirt." And I'm like, "Yeah, I do too." It shows me in all of my meanness, and I think that, I think that men, you know, we need to get comfortable just being ourselves, and being ourselves loudly and peacefully, and I think that funny shirts are one of the great ways to do that. I hear people talking about how, "Oh, my boss doesn't like me wearing my Roosevelts to work," and I'm like, "Why does your boss care?" Like, if and like you said, we have so many sterile environments in this world, and does it really? Like, I think about stuff like this all the time where I'm like, at what point did we decide that black and navy blue suits were what people had to do work in?
You know, this goes back to something else you said, and I'm going to jump onto my soapbox. We had people before us that thought these were the great ideas. The people before them thought this was the great ideas, and those people were limited based off of the understanding. Each
Yeah,
each each peer was limited based off the understanding, and they got so conditioned. You wear a freaking suit to work because that's what's professional, but
yeah,
you you see a person coming in there and they're like, "Why are you getting so much progress?" Well, because I'm not following the exact thing that you're telling me to do.
yeah,
Because, hey, just disrupt it a little bit.
yeah,
And like I will tell you, if somebody was wearing a funny tie, I'm gonna be like, "Okay, bud, you got a personality, bud. I want to hear a
yeah,
little bit more about you." And if you're gonna come in looking super sterile, everything is just perfect on you,
yeah,
I'm gonna be like, "You're probably a uptight asshole." That's usually what's gonna go through my head. I'm like, I'm judging the person off of it,
yeah,
and I don't want to because this person wanted to be loved, and this is what they
yeah,
did. This is what they're following the example of other people to say, "This is how I'm going to be seen, and this is actually gonna get me what I want." And what we don't realize is that if we mute the creative, which I feel like that's what we're doing, is muting
yeah,
people, we actually create this whole other narrative. And while we were talking, one of the things I saw that's similar is that when those kids were picking on you, you weren't able to vocalize. So you went to shoveling. And then when we get older, we're building off the blocks that we know. And until we actually are able to have that aha moment, where
yeah,
Roosevelt sounds like it was for you a little bit too with Disney
yeah,
theme parks. Like we get stuck in these damn loops until somebody just says, "Mike,
yeah,
hi."
yeah. I mean, one of the most dangerous questions in the world, but I think one of the most important questions in the world is why. I throughout my career, um, if I didn't have such a connection to the question why, I probably could have gone a lot further in those parts of my career. If I just accepted, well, it's 'cause that's the way we do it. But you mentioned disrupting, and that's exactly it. Disrupting is asking why. Is saying why do we need this? Why do we need a dress code? Why do we need um, you know, why do we need rules for this or that? And if there's a good reason for it, then there's a good reason for it. But people who have rules and power structures that exist for a reason rarely try to avoid being asked why, because their answer is because of this. I had I think back to a coworker of mine who, he mentioned funny ties. He liked wearing funny ties, and that was a thing that he liked doing. Um, but one of our rules in the place I was working at the time was that you couldn't wear ties. Um, and the reason was that we had clients that might grab you by your tie and you can't get away. Uh, so we had to have that conversation. And I remember having that conversation. And because the rule made sense, it was a really easy conversation to have. But I later on had this conversation where it was I didn't have Roosevelt's hadn't become a thing in my life yet, but I had started to like to wear more colorful shirts and stuff. And I had a boss who was like, "No, you can't wear that." And I said, "Why though?" Like, I accept the no tie rule because that's a safety thing and that's legitimate. But what is it about my tie? Or, another thing was summertime. It would get really, really hot in the summertime where I was working. And, women would wear skirts and dresses. And then one day I was just like, I have these golf shorts. They're, 9 times out of 10, I wear khakis to work every day. These golf shorts are legitimately khakis. They're just missing the bottom portion of the khaki. So I wear them one day, and boss says, "Well, you can't wear shorts." I'm like, "Well, but she's wearing a skirt. What? Why?" um, and then I said, "Well, would you prefer if I came in the skirt?" And then their brains begin to sort of move through the process, and I'm like, "Oh, I see that we're starting to have the thoughts now." Um, because I don't know. I mean, it's different state by state, but in where I was in Ontario, um, if I decided I wanted to wear a skirt, there was absolutely nothing they could do about that because that's what I wanted to wear. Um, at the time, our dress code still had male and female, you know, dress, but the legislation is really, really clear that no matter, you can have examples, but everyone gets to pick from both sides of the chart. Um,
I'm
long
just
story
thinking
short,
about.
eventually I wore my shorts and they were fine with them.
I was thinking about it, like, can I actually get away with wearing a kilt to work? And that would be amazing.
Again, one of the reasons this isn't a button down, but one of the reasons I so much love the button downs when I go in the theme parks is the breathability.
Mhm.
There's opening, you get the air. The kilt is just the ultimate breathability. Everything's breathing. Um,
So, I've actually said this to multiple people, and I was like, the Iraqis that I was around that was actually wearing those man dresses. That's what we called them.
yeah,
And I'm like, that would have been amazing. Just that warm gust of air going up there, just would
yeah.
have been so relaxing. And like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, what do you mean, what's wrong with me? Just think about this for a second. Let's just sit here and let's just really contemplate who has it wrong right now. Like wearing all this shit or having a nice gust of air going up there. But realistically, it was something I was actually going to point out. So I don't know if you know who Adam Grant is. He wrote this book. It's called Think Again. I read a lot, or I used to read a
Okay.
lot when,
Yep.
and so I'm actually in school full time, working full time, doing a podcast. So I try to get in what I can. When people have the ability to rethink what they understand and what they could be able to learn. So the founder of BlackBerry, he did not want to actually make his phone have a bunch of applications on it. Steve Jobs did not want to turn the iPod into an iPhone. Most
Yeah.
people don't realize that. Well, Steve Jobs listened to a bunch of his software engineers, and when he did, he switched it over to the iPhone, and it became one of the most popular things out there. And then
Yeah.
it took over a bunch of government contracts. And the BlackBerry, which was by far way far advanced, and they wanted to get stuck in a rut, and they got lined up to actually lose. Well, we have the ability to really think about you wearing a Roosevelt shirt to work and actually making you happy or losing you, now rehiring somebody, spending money into training, being extremely slow,
Yeah.
or and then on top of it, this is actually speeds up that laugh conversation, what you were saying before, and then be able to get to the nitty gritty and be able to help a person find a solution instead of
Yeah.
them actually feeling judged. You're really humanizing them.
I remember I was on vacation in the Dominican Republic, and my buddy and I had gone. We had this great sort of villa where 3 or 4 couples were hanging out and having vacation, and we went down to get burgers from the main resort, and these guys were sitting around a table having this discussion, and I've heard they were a little older than me. And I've heard this discussion a million times. They were all business owners, and they're like, I can't get anyone to stay. I can't get anyone. All these young kids don't want to work. I can't get them to stay. I can't get them to do the work. They don't like to work hard. They don't." And I listened for a bit, and I finally said, do you mind if I chat to you for a few minutes? And we had that exact discussion, but not about dress code, about just like, I said, well, what do you pay them? And all of them are like, minimum wage. I'm like, have you thought about paying more? And oh, we can't possibly. I'm like, well, wait for a second. You're constantly going through rehiring people and training them and all of this. That's got to cost you something, right? And we get to them, and so I finally said, I'm like, here's what you have to understand is that the kids that you're talking about, these 20-year-olds in this day and age, have grown up in a time where they'd never experienced anyone wanting to actually invest in them. They've only been told they have to accept the bare minimum. If you say, I'm going to invest in you as part of my company, this generation will respond, I promise you. And so we got talking and we had a couple beers. And finally, one of them says, well, what are you? Are you like some kind of HR consultant? And, oh, important part. They were all from Texas. So they're like, are you some HR consultant or, business guru? I'm like, no, I'm a professional union rep. And these 4 business owners from Texas all looked at me like I had 8 heads. And I'm like, I mean, I'm speaking a language that you're not speaking. And that's the answer.
Mhm.
And I kept in touch with them. And 2 of them tried what I said, and 2 of them didn't. And the guys who tried what I said, both of them were like, yeah, we have employees that have been here for 3 years now. I'm like, funny that, isn't it? That when you look at what you're doing and say, what could we possibly change? Rather than look at the other side and say, what's wrong with the other side? Um, Not to say, I mean, I'm sure there are lazy people out there in this generation. There were lazy people in that generation. And there'll be lazy people in generations to come.
Mhm.
But to simply look at an entire generation and say they're all lazy and don't want to work is it's just not true. They've been raised into a generation where they've been told they cannot expect loyalty from an employer and they cannot expect that employer to actually want to invest in them. And what I said to these guys, I'm like, this opens up a great possibility to you because all you've got to do is do any basic investment into them, and you will be the best boss they have ever had, and they will not want to leave.
Mhm.
And it's wild that the one guy was still he still says to me, he's like, I can't believe you were right. And I'm like, it happens. But again, it's being open to disruption, being open to why, and being open to the possibility that you don't completely understand the way the entire world works. And it's a beautiful thing when you open up the possibility that you do not completely understand everything in front of you, because you start a conversation, and everyone has a conversation to have, um, regardless of age, race. You know, um, we all have a conversation to have, and we all have a different perspective. And it's wild what you can do in this world when you actually start to listen and start to take what people have to say into account.
I'm going to ask you a question because I know you brought this up through me in text when we talked on the phone and then before we came to this podcast and about listening.
Yeah.
The uh, the question is about men talking about mental health and not getting stuck into the red pill.
Yep.
That kind of disgusting layer. Like, can you help us be in your perspective of how to talk about mental health, and not try to vilify a side?
I mean, I think the best way to look at this is that there is currently a battle for young men in this world. Um, and the red pill side, um, what they're taking advantage of is young men feeling left out of the conversation. We have to on, and I hate the battle, metaphor, but it is. I mean, we have to open up a conversation with young men and say, it's okay to have feelings. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be scared. If you are alive in 2025 and you are not having feelings and scared, I am more concerned about you than if you are having feelings and scared. We do not live in a world that is without problem. And I think it's really, really important to understand that if we don't open up the conversation, someone else will.
Mhm.
And we are not going to like the conversation they are going to want to have, because they are going to, people get stuck thinking about the worst case scenario, but radicalization never starts at the worst case scenario. It starts bit by bit by bit by bit by bit. And it always begins with, they don't understand you. They don't see you. They don't hear you. They're never going to see you. They're never going to hear you because of who you are. And no matter what basis you're being radicalized based on, that is the exact beginning of it. That's how human trafficking starts. That's how terrorism starts. That is how any bad in the world starts, is isolating and making someone feel alone. And I mean, you know, we deny the existence of young men feeling alone and left out at our own peril, because we will continue to see suicides, homicides, violence, and addiction, all of the bad things that you can possibly think of will continue so long as we continue to ignore the fact that there are young men who feel left out.
Mm.
we can discuss why, we can discuss how we got here, but you have to, meet them where they are right now, and where they are right now is they feel left out. And, that's how that side gets a hold of them, because they say, "We understand you." And, I think that the side of love and Disney is, much nicer and, much happier, and leads to long-term success and happiness, whereas that side can lead to a whole lot of anger, a whole lot of addiction, a whole lot of violence. And, I'd rather have a whole bunch of people who wanna go on Big Thunder Mountain than a whole bunch of people who want to go and do I won't even I won't even bring it up, but just wanna go and do bad things in the world. Um, yeah,
I appreciate that. It's again, it goes back to people being in echo chambers, being quiet, shunned.
yeah,
Like it takes the example of you pushing somebody to a much more volatile situation where people are acting and behaving and saying, instead of actually meeting them with love and
yeah,
kindness and curiosity, like I shared with you since like we started talking, I'm here about trying to build bridges, and I
yep,
want to build bridges on both sides.
yep,
And how can I help? How can you help me understand you? Asking about curiosity, even if I don't like what you're saying, I
mhm,
want to know why you're getting to that point. So I could be able to understand the reverse engineer of how you got there and why you're
yeah,
thinking. Because if you just take mental health and take that major depressive disorder, or you take people with PTSD, you're going to be feeling like you're in an echo chamber. You're not going to be able to connect to people.
yep,
And unfortunately, it's going to create this huge demise with people and hence the suicide or to homicide, like you said.
yep,
If you learn how to be able to articulate your emotions, your feelings, being able to make yourself feel seen, allowing yourself to be rejected, to be accepted, because it's easy to say, hey, let's just accept everybody. But at the same time, we have to give ourselves permission to be rejected by the people that don't belong in our lives. When I
yeah,
got out of the hospital after 13 weeks, I said, I am going on a failing mission. I'm going to fail at a bunch of stuff. And the other thing was called radical rejection is something I thought of.
yeah,
I said, you know, if somebody asked me, why haven't you done much with your life? I had PTSD. I almost ended my life. What did you do for the last 6 months? I went to hospitals. I was taking care of my mental health. When I started being honest with people, it allowed the people to get out of my life that doesn't belong there and
mhm,
allowed the people to walk into my life. What
mhm,
was also interesting, the people that were weary about me being like the plague and me being authentic, it allowed
yep,
me to hold up a mirror to them. It
yep,
allowed them to be able to see that it's okay. I can lay down this fucking mask. I need to. I'm okay to stop rejecting myself before other people reject me.
yep,
Like saying, "Hey, I understand what you've been through."
yep,
I I can say, "Let me hear about your story. Let
yep,
me actually sit with you." Like, why did you get to that point? Well, I
yep,
don't actually know. And it's okay not to know the words. It's
yep,
okay to be kind of dumbfounded at the same time. But
mhm,
having loving curiosity, at least for me, is the best way to start to connect to people.
absolutely. Curiosity is required. We were talking about, on a podcast, that I co-host, we were talking about the Disney parks in Japan and how curiosity is a integral part of Japanese culture, and how curious they are um, about foreigners and about the people that are, about Disney and about the things that they know. And I was one of the guys that was on the podcast with us as a guest had been a service member who was in Japan stationed, and he said, "Yeah, it's wild that I wasn't raised to be curious like this." And I was immediately suspicious of their curiosity. And what he said, what got me to the point that I was able to see it as not confrontational is that the other part of Japanese culture is just an absolutely massive level of politeness. So he's like, I could not possibly think they had ulterior motives because they were so unbelievably polite about it. And I think that's um and it's something that I notice, and I don't ever want to be the foreigner living in America that just points a finger and says this is wrong. Um because it's not, I mean, we have the same problem in Canada to a certain degree, but we truly um don't encourage curiosity. Um and there's a lot of reasons for that. I think that there's standardized testing in schools, underfunding in schools, not having social programs. Um, but we get to a point where we don't want our kids to be curious, because if they are curious, we then have to answer the question. Um, we talk about, but like, a question that I see people pose all the time. Well, what do I tell my kids about gay people? You tell them they're people and they love that person, and that's it. How did that become a hard conversation to have? To me, it's like, what do I tell my kids about that tree over there? It's a tree. Why don't we learn more about the tree? Um, and I don't. It might sound political. I don't think it's political. I think it's just human that we have to get back to a point where curiosity is encouraged, because the more you are curious and the more you learn about the world, the less likely you are to fall into that hate, to fall into that otherism, because you learn that at the end of the day, we're all very, very similar. Um, we face different problems, but we face similar problems. And then we can get back to, why aren't we wearing dresses that would be more appropriately ventilated for for a desert environment than I'm assuming that you were in some form of camo, the thickest material humanly possible, and 18 pounds of ballistic armor. Um,
Probably
and
about close to 45 pounds, but yeah.
yeah. um, and I mean, I talking to veterans, one thing that I always think is interesting is the weight of the gear. And that how much that weighs you down. And if you take that into civilian life, and how much are your defense mechanisms in civilian life weighing you down? How much is it preventing you from living, that you are protecting yourself from this? And, not to say, I mean, hey, if I was going into a war zone, I'd want protective armor too. But, when you get home, I think that's, I've heard veterans say, that you are so programmed to constantly be in defense mode, and how much of your energy are you spending in defense mode? And, how much of our energy, even if we're not veterans, are we spending in defense mode? Are we spending not being open to that conversation, not being open to the world around us because we think we're protecting ourselves? But what you're doing is you're just slowly destroying your body, slowly developing arthritis and high blood pressure and all of these things because you are carrying around all of this weight, be it physical or emotional.
So you talked about a couple of things, and I wanted to actually just touch on them before you get to it. I know I always keep saying you said a few things, but one was the toxic part of capitalism, where it's like let's oversimplify everything down to the nth degree to be able to get the most amount of profits, the bang for the buck, and remove
Yeah,
curiosity because curiosity is honestly what impedes our gains.
yeah,
But when people actually invest into people, invest into ideas, invest into it, they will be penny poor, dollar rich. They'll be able
yeah,
to grow. More people are caring about what type of gains. Unfortunately, that filters into how we look at people
yeah,
instead of actually being able to really look at it. Same thing with mental health. People say, "Oh, it's inside. It's just all I got to deal with," but they don't realize the intrinsic gains that you gain from it, and talking to people, working through your situation, breathing, like living and loving and growing with a person is probably the most longest thing that you're going to do. But if you're a piece of shit, you're going to keep trying to love, but you're going to be a piece of shit. It's going to be filtered through pretty
yeah,
much shit. Sorry.
yeah,
And if you're always in defense mode, again, everything like going back to the Japanese comment, you're filtering it through a defense mode mechanism. You're
yeah,
actually looking at them because this is a possibility of threat. As a person that I remember telling this to my old counselor, the Marine Corps taught me how to survive. They didn't teach me how to live.
yeah,
And surviving is not living. I existing in time and space until the point that it just became so necrotic that I wanted to end that type of dilemma. And having these type of conversations might actually spark up a conversation to somebody else. I know my brother, he told me, he said, "Will, I was hanging out with some of my friends back in so my brother was back in Long Island, New York. He was actually born in Ontario as well. My mother was
oh,
born in Ontario as well, and actually Ottawa, both of them.
okay,
And they, he was back in New York, and he was like, "Well, I was over talking to Andrew and a few of his brothers, and he was like, your podcast came up." And then we started talking about mental health for 2 hours.
yeah,
And I said, "Al, that is a huge win for me. I
uh-huh,
appreciate this." And our conversation that we had today was just what I really wanted to do. Like, you were actually thank you so much for being vulnerable with me and to a complete stranger and to a bunch of other people. I know we have similar missions,
yeah,
and that is actually to 1, to disrupt, 2 is actually to help people heal and be curious about healing, and the other thing is that we don't have to be turds. We can actually love,
yeah,
and we can actually be much more than that.
yeah. I mean, I always, I have gotten thanked for being vulnerable before, and I always have a really hard time how I respond to that because, um, I don't think I'm doing something special. I think, I think that it's just I'm just being me. Um, and I can't think of the person who the quote is from, but there's a quote that I love that of course I blame long COVID for this. But it says it's something something to the effect of being yourself in a difficult time is an act of bravery and defiance. And I think that's really profound that just being yourself. not coming into the conversation with an agenda, not coming into the conversation with, you know, uh, you know, a tool belt or you just, I'm just going to show up and have this conversation. And I love that. And I think that that's something that for a lot of reasons we got away from. And we have to get back to. We have to get back to the possibility of just sitting with a complete stranger and saying, yeah, this is some of the stuff that I dealt with. This is some of the stuff I dealt with. Yeah, that's cool. That's you went through some stuff, but you're here. And that's something that I really hope that I actually probably one of the proudest moments, similar to the story you just shared of my content creator life. I was walking through Disney Springs and someone stopped me. And Disney, for those not completely obsessed, Disney Springs is a little shopping area that Disney operates in Walt Disney World. So I'm walking through there and someone stops me and says, "Hey, are you at that point, my account was Theme Park Mike B. Are you Theme Park Mike B?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I am." And I was like, very happy. I usually get mistaken for other influencers, but so I'm like, "Yeah, I am. You like my content?" And they're like, "Yeah, we love your content." And I actually tell my kids every night before they go to bed, "You matter because of your content." And I'm like, that right there. That is exactly why I do this. And I so soon after we started talking, I was like, I think this guy is going to get it because, that conversation that they were having was the exact same thing is that, your content is out there in the world getting people to open up and have those conversations. And that's a beautiful thing. So thank you for doing what you do. And thank you for having me. Yeah.
Before we actually say goodbye, the question I have for you is what is the message besides "you matter"? Because I want to say "you matter." It means a lot. But what is your message? And then also, where can they find you?
I would say my message is look for the connections. I focus on theme parks and themed entertainment because that's sort of something that I love. Also, a little aviation thrown in there too. But all of those things are things that you cannot do alone, and you were not meant to do alone. You were not. Walt Disney never created a theme park for you to go to by yourself. The other guests there are part of your experience. So when you go through your day, be open to other people being a part of your experience and you being a part of their experience. And I think that if you are open to that part, to connecting with human beings and connecting with people around you, your life is going to be so much more, you're going to lead a life that you want to live and you are going to make a positive impact in the world. And you can find me. The easiest place to find me is on Instagram. And I am at it's Uncle Mike BBEE. Um, yeah, it's Uncle Mike B. With the B being like the buzzing bee. And there are there could be an entire podcast episode simply talking about my reasons for that entire name. But there is content out there that talks about that. And then from there you can find me on YouTube, on TikTok, and on Threads, and whatever they come up with in the next 2 weeks, I'll probably be on there too. But that's the easiest place to find me. You can also find me on the podcast that I co-host called Sharing the Magic, where we interview folks in the Disney creative community, and it is a fantastic podcast. That we have deep conversations with people and talk about the connections and talk about, one of the things that we say is story imitates life and story creates life. And people talk a lot about Walt Disney and his impact on the world. And one thing that I think they forget, and you mentioned it, is that they forget that a big part of what he did, he was not, Roy was the business side of Disney. Walt was the creative side of Disney. Walt took wild risks and spent more money than he probably could have afforded to build something that he thought needed to be created. And we have gotten so far away from taking those risks. And I hope that we begin to see a world where we take risks and where we open up and connect. And if people want to connect with me, once again, I'm at It's Uncle Mike B on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and on YouTube. I am Adventures with Uncle Mike B, and I would love to see you there. And if William will have me back, I'd love to come back and chat more about mental health and life and theme parks and everything in between.
I'm looking forward to having you on here when I actually have a similar person or a little bit different, and actually
Yeah,
talking about men's health and actually talking about communicating and disrupting and more than just this conversation. I wanted to tell you, man, I appreciate it. And the reason I actually tell you I appreciate your vulnerability is because it's something that you could say that it's easy for you to do. And what you're doing is you're spearheading the way and you're allowing other younger people, even older people, to be able to understand this is okay, this is safe, even though might feel normal to you, and this is just you being authentic.
yeah,
I want to say you being authentic and being real, it actually helps pave the way for other people. And if I remember correctly, in the book Creating Magic, it actually talks about Walt Disney taking some crazy risk right in the beginning of it, where I took for my
yep.
business class. So, Mike, we're going to be talking soon. I appreciate you, dude.
Absolutely. Thank you for making this space to be vulnerable. And you matter.
You matter.